Joining us from Midtown Manhattan is a digital native, media enfant terrible. Helion, I would have missed all these words on the SAT. Mosheh Oinounou. He is, of course, the founder of Mo News, previously a legacy media executive, if you could call it that now. He was the executive producer at CBS Evening News. You had, in past lives, you and I crossed paths at Bloomberg TV or at Fox News. Sir, you are well-traveled for being such a youngster.
We're getting into our mid-40s now, Mr. Farzad. So
I'm about to hit 50, so enjoy what you have.
I
Sir,
will.
you were very top of mind because clearly your old stomping ground, CBS, was now subsumed into this Paramount Ellison empire. And they haven't stopped there. For anybody following the news, the family that owns Oracle, the massive software and database and cloud services company where kind of money can be printed endlessly, came in, took Paramount off the hands of the Redstone family, which had mismanaged it, which had not innovated. And shortly after, barely, the stomach acids barely got to digesting that, they want to take on Warner Brothers in this hostile bid right now. We're going to get into that. But first things first, what are you hearing from the old troops at CBS News? Because they have a new boss in Barry Weiss, right? This was the head of that she left the New York Times. She started an anti-woke kind of online newspaper, whatever it is. It's not exactly the most comfortable fit.
It's a fascinating, well, first of all, the thing that I think people at CBS have gotten used to for the past, 2 decades is whiplash. And now things are moving even quicker than they were before. Constant management changes. In the post-Moonves era, things
Less
have
Moonves.
Right.
Yeah.
So Les Moonves, longtime leader of CBS, lost his job amidst the Me Too headlines in 2018. And CBS really has not figured out a way to sort of get traction again after that. I don't think that any network was as impacted by Me Too as CBS, with the departures of Charlie Rose, Jeff Fager, the longtime head of 60 Minutes and former chairman of the news division, Les Moonves, who it appears now in retrospect was really kind of keeping the thing together. He had his own issues with Shari Redstone, of course, but ultimately the news division itself has just, they've gone through, I think, 6 presidents at this point, pre-Barry Weiss, in a matter of 8 years, Robin. So it's just been a matter of repeated layoffs, whiplash over there, and now, the prospect that if Paramount's hostile bid goes through, that they'll be getting together with CNN for the first time.
There always has been commonality in the Venn diagram with CNN. We see people like Anderson Cooper, maybe Christiane Amanpour. It's always been kind of a hot stove league, right? That it's a natural thing for CBS and CNN, like cable and a broadcast, to merge at some point. Of course, what's shocking to me is how much the news has become an afterthought in the grand scheme of things. The shiny objects here are the studios and the big streamers. And it's almost like these things are loss leaders, especially people where, money is really no object. They're not there scrutinizing the financials of CBS News or CNN so closely.
And honestly, it's not just that you're not making that much money off the news division. It's creating more headaches for you than it's worth. As recently as this weekend, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene was on 60 Minutes, and you had President Trump going off being like, well, what happened to the new Paramount? This is worse than the old, this is worse than the old CBS, where, you have a situation here where the Ellisons are very close to the president. And ultimately, there were, promises made about ensuring that the news division will be more fair in the future, less biased in the future. So the implications here, Robin, as you watch this Netflix, Warner Brothers, Paramount love triangle unfold here, who will win over, who will be able to successfully and legally woo over Warner Brothers Discovery, the implications here, both politically for the news divisions, Hollywood, Wall Street, and then internationally, given the tens of billions promised by the several Arab sovereign wealth funds, are fascinating to watch.
Break that out for me. This is midweek. I'm reading it in the Wall Street Journal. There's really no shame in putting it out there that the Saudis are chipping into this Ellison effort. The fact that the president's son-in-law, his private equity firm, is involved in this. The fact that the president has not been cagey about telling Ellison, if you guys do win and Paramount does get Warner Brothers, ergo CNN, with the whole thing, you will move stuff around there. I mean, this stuff, we used to be puritanical about it. We used to recuse ourselves. I'm convinced that somebody told Jimmy Carter he had to divest his peanut farm in 75 before running for president. And that seems so quaint.
Oh, it's all out there in the open now, right? I was struck maybe I shouldn't have been struck by, the way that the president answered questions. It was over the weekend, Kennedy Center honors, red carpet in Washington. I've had the good fortune during my time at CBS of being able to attend that event. And he's being asked questions. What do you think about this merger? And he's like, I might be involved in it. Here's my view of the CEOs. This is my view of things. Whereas, most modern previous presidents would recuse themselves from such things. It's a matter for the FCC. We'll let them manage that. We'll let the DOJ manage that, and so on and so forth. And now, very explicitly, you have on one side here the Paramount bid, including, as you mentioned, Jared Kushner, the son-in-law, the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, the Qatari Sovereign Wealth Fund, the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund. By the way, the first visit President Trump made this year to a foreign country was Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And so he's been super close. Right now, the U.S. military is retrofitting a Qatari jet to be the new Air Force One. There is a military arrangement unprecedented military arrangement that we see, unfolding here between the U.S. and the Qataris, the U.S. and the Saudis. And interestingly, to try to get around the laws, they're not asking for board seats, which is a rare thing. If you offer $10 billion to buy Warner Brothers, typically you'd say, hey, I want a seat on the board. Well, to get around things, they're like, no, we don't need any board seats. So what is happening beneath the surface there? There are so many questions to be asked. And frankly, it's one of those situations where, yes, you're hearing from the usual suspects, the Elizabeth Warrens of the world, but you're also hearing from some Republicans who are like, I have a lot of questions here on this front. And it's so interesting, Robin, because that's one side. And the other side, you have Netflix, which is already the 500-pound gorilla in Hollywood. Already, the studios are super concerned about Netflix and its growth and the impact it's having on the industry. And now the number one streamer is going to eat the number three streamer. By the way, number two is Amazon. They have other things going on in addition to streaming. And they're going to eat, they're going to be this mega company. And what does that mean? What does that mean for Hollywood? What does that mean for actors? What does that mean for the theater? Does the theater exist in the future if effectively Netflix is owning Warner Brothers and the studio there? And then, beyond that, what does it mean to the consumers? Okay?
Dish on this love triangle as you describe it for me. Let's remember, I'm old enough to remember, young man. We had Josh Turingel on the show, and I remember the late Roger Ebert penned a column for Business Week on why Netflix circa 2011 should break itself out into a DVD business and a more kind of growth-centric streaming business. It was inconceivable back then that they would build something like House of Cards, Narcos, Stranger Things everywhere, and end up becoming so big that they could literally eat Hollywood. The whole streaming thing, they were not shackled to a legacy business. Now they're so huge that they can come in and easily overpay for Warner Brothers, which has destroyed other kingdoms, let's be honest. If anybody remembers the AOL Time Warner merger, if everybody remembers AT&T trying to buy them, David Zaslav and Discovery, but to explain for everybody, this would just be the growth parts of the business, the studio and HBO Max, the streamer, not CNN, not the cable channels, whereas Paramount, the Ellisons and the Arab Middle East are ready to buy the whole thing, including CNN.
I just want to begin with this. I was just looking up the quote, Robin. Jeff Bewkes, a Time Warner CEO from 2010, you might remember this quote, referred to Netflix in 2010 as the Albanian army. When asked, is he worried about Netflix? He goes, I'm as worried about Netflix as you would be about the Albanian military and their impact on things. And the Albanian military has conquered the world. It's a super interesting divide when it comes to the interests here, right? Netflix is like, I don't need your CNNs and your TNTs. You spin that off, and cable is not something we want to be involved in. Whereas over on the Paramount side, not only will we take your studio and your HBO Max, we will also take your cable entities because we have our own, right? He is sitting on and figuring out what to do with the MTVs and the Comedy Centrals and the
Nickelodeon and all them, which are absolutely forgotten. VH1, at a time where our kids are using YouTube overwhelmingly.
Yeah, none of those brands, unfortunately, have done a great job of figuring out the next era, as influential as they once were 2 decades ago. So, ultimately they're sitting there at Paramount being like, we'll take a couple more cable properties. Why not? We'll figure out what to do with them. Plus their sports contracts and obviously the influence of CNN globally is super interesting.
Well, time out, Mosh. Outside of the whole cynical late stage capitalism, private equity comes in, slashes, burns. We don't need 2 marketing departments. We don't need 2 sales forces if it's Warner and Paramount. We don't need all of these lots. They're clearly redundancies and synergies. Is there something to be said about Oracle and on deck to acquire some of TikTok's US assets, having a data analytics business, having a tech stack that would finally modernize a kind of a Paramount Warner digitally. This is your world. You might understand this. Or is that all just kind of, it's like the same way the AT&T execs are like, this is going to get our people to buy more wireless plans.
So you have a lot of great pieces here, right? You have, when you talk about the Ellison family, right? You have David, young David, and then you have Larry, right? Who, as of the Bloomberg billionaires list yesterday, he was number 2 behind Elon Musk in terms of richest humans on Earth.
Hundreds of billions of dollars.
$277 billion as of this taping that, he is worth. And so he's involved in the TikTok acquisition. So let's think about the component parts here. It's a fascinating challenge. And I think smart people getting together being like, if we own, TikTok, Paramount, CBS, Showtime, HBO, a movie studio, CNN. I mean, you have an incredible wealth of data that's available to you. You have incredible audience reach available to you. I mean, this is a supercharged growth opportunity here, and which explains why David Ellison has been so eager. David Zaslav, who runs Warner Brothers Discovery, and just coming off the whole AT&T thing, just stabilizing things. He wasn't ready. He wasn't aggressively trying to sell this, but Ellison came to him. I mean,
he was aggressively trying to get paid. Always is my impression, right?
Zaslav.
Yes.
Who, by the way, out of this, I mean, if you read some of the Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal stories, he might be a billionaire out of this, which is super incredible. That's beyond the $50 million annual salary that he's been, one of the largest salaries, when you look at all the Fortune 500 companies.
And he mashed a big cable channel company into Warner Brothers. Let's not forget what Discovery was. I don't think these channels would be worth much today, but it was just the same way AOL, which was overvalued, was mashed into, Warner Brothers and everything. And that was a catastrophic, probably the most infamously bad merger in history. Just 25 years of this company getting kicked around, overvalued, oversold, overleveraged. And it's amazing that it's still in one piece, albeit hobbling into this hostile bid.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely component parts that, like, again, there's so much sort of legacy with it, right? Like, remember, the peak for a lot of these networks and a lot of these component parts. But, getting to your previous question, you have a lot to work with here. You have a lot of great material. If you're a chef and you're trying to cook something up, you got some incredible ingredients here. The question is, what is your combination and can you get the right things together? And in a world where scale matters, and there's Disney, and there's Netflix, there is a race, if you're Comcast, if you're Paramount, to become larger in order to compete with these guys.
Full disclosure, I'm Robin Farzad. We're joined by friend of the show, Mosheh Oinounou. He is the founder, of course, of Mo News, which he founded in the depths of the pandemic, just out of his natural journalistic curiosities. Great profile in the New York Times. He's been on the show several times. You love it when we have him on, so I've had him on again and again. He's a man in demand.
Robin was texting me. He's like, the people, they want you back.
Is this kvelling or kvetching? I mean, you're of that persuasion. But look, here's the interesting thing. You've been tapped before to kick the wheels to look at these digital media assets, like CNN, for example. They had ridiculous desktop market share in CNN digital. They had the chance to do it, but it was never going to move the needle the way cable carriage fees and that peak business under Jeff Zucker 4 or 5 years ago. It's really hard to innovate out of that. When the legacy players, that's how you're making your money. It's how they're still making their money, overwhelmingly by cable. It's not a digital business. I mean, hell or high water, you find me companies that have self-disrupted that well. Maybe there's Apple, maybe there's Hyundai, NVIDIA and others have done it. It's really hard to pry people away from their core moneymaker.
Yeah, I mean, that was a challenge we dealt with at CBS and all these companies are dealing with, which is like, you still get paid a lot of money, especially in cable and a network, from subscription fees, right? The cable companies paying you $2 per subscriber. And then beyond that, what a 30-second ad makes you still today, right?
Pennies versus the $10, $20 bill, right?
Exactly. Like, I get a YouTube video with 1 million views. It's still not adding up to a 30-second ad at 12:22 during the noon show of, CNN, which has about 400,000 viewers, right? And so the digital dollars are gradually catching up. But ultimately, for these networks, well, first of all, the transition time was 15 years ago. There was sort of living high on the hog for a very long time. There was the impact of the first Trump administration, which, like, 2016 was sort of that seminal moment when we know the transition is quickly happening to streaming and social media. Social media is a real thing. It's where people are getting their news. But ultimately, who comes into the White House but Donald Trump? Trump won. And the ratings are through the roof. So you're living high on the hog if you're a cable news channel like CNN.
But you're also living high on the hog if you're the New York Times. It goosed
Correct?
their subscriber count. And they are now, I would argue that a CBS News or a CNN is measured up against the New York Times, not Fox News, which, as you know, is idiosyncratic with its demography, with its kind of state news angle and whatnot. I mean, has anybody else figured out what you're doing to get people to pay and pay severely for news? Maybe the Wall Street Journal,
The
maybe,
Journal? Yeah.
but that's more of a B2B thing. The
Yeah.
Washington Post clearly has not worked out with Jeff Bezos. Maybe there's a billionaire in Los Angeles, Patrick Soon-Shiong. That has not worked out. Boston, there's John Henry. There are all these billionaires, but nobody is really convinced. And by the way, if I were starting from
Benioff,
scratch,
the Time. Yeah.
Time, he wants to probably shed Time magazine. That's not working for them. So to my mind, maybe it's the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal who've figured it out. And even then, it's not a gangbusters business. It's just a business that pays for itself.
Right. I mean, and they, have the good fortune. They're not a video first business, which is super expensive to do video versus print. So you have, all this legacy infrastructure, right? These studios and, to put a television program together, it takes a lot of human beings. To write a news story, in some cases, it just takes one reporter, right? Like I'm looking at one right now, Robin, who did some, who does great reporting, and you're writing a story. Television, it's a team sport. Team sport is expensive. And so ultimately, when you look across the board here, you can count on two hands, like, compelling, digital media startups, right? Jim and Mike, who launched Politico and then launched Axios and have sold them, for, I think, Politico for $1 billion, Axios for like 500 million to Cox. There's a handful of successful stories. Barry Weiss, who you mentioned, Free Press, right? Legacy media to new media, back to legacy media.
Not that it was an overwhelmingly profitable cash producing business. It was
Correct.
that billionaires, it gave them cloud cover. It made them feel like part of the conversation. We could argue about this,
influence,
right?
And relevance. And that's the thing, people often ask me, like, what's the challenge over at CBS? I was like, well, what's not the challenge, right? You got the business, which we've been talking about. You got the relevance, right? Like, I don't know. Well, like, what aired on the CBS Evening News last night, Robin? I don't know. You don't know either.
And yet they still, as you know, they still torment one another about staff changes. People ripping Nora O'Donnell to the New York Post, that was a whole parlor game. Maurice Dubois coming, leaving, John Dickerson. I'm thinking, if this is a melting iceberg, why are we paying so much attention to it? Because it's still something that makes them money. It's still a profit center. It's still a cash flow center. What I don't understand is
institution. It's an institution,
So was the milkman, right? I mean, we've gotten past that. So were other things that we've gotten past. So was, I guess, Blockbuster Video, right? I'm not trying to sound mercenary, but what these guys haven't done was plow that into a robust digital standing. Like, I mean, CBSN, I've been on every now and then, over the top. Do we go straight to these sites? Are we ready to pay for them? This is the existential thing that you are mulling at Mo News as you move to a premium tier and subscription business.
Yeah, that's the big challenge. And, I don't know if anyone's written the great obituary yet for the legacy media, and like, what didn't they mess up in the early 2000s? It's very interesting because, like, I often compare it to music, right? There was a music, moment, right, when we were going from CDs to streaming. And in between there, as we were figuring out digital music, right, there was Napster and Kazaa and some of these like illegal downloads, and then
LimeWire and everything.
LimeWire, I destroyed many Dell laptops in the early 2000s.
Likewise, they got so hot that you could fry an egg on them.
And I was like, oh, the song's finally downloaded. Oh no, that was a virus. That was not a song. And so, Steve Jobs figured it out, right, with iTunes, and got us in the era of like, yes, it's digital, but you still have to pay for it. And then I think, whether it was national or local media, the fact that people got used to a very long time, coming from a world where we paid for a newspaper to show up on our driveway in the morning.
Marginally, not the fully loaded cost, as you know, right? This stuff at CBS was cross-subsidized by the morning shows, by the various other things that they did, by the film studio, by certain cash flows. Like, I remember, what was the Mike Wallace thing, The Insider? What was it? About the tobacco scandal,
the
60 Minutes. Corporate, I don't know if it was Westinghouse, always would get in the way, whether it was RCA and NBC or whether it was Disney and ABC.
Yeah, I mean, TV was one thing, right? And then eventually Moonves was one of those who actually got them to charge sub fees for the networks, for the over-the-air free, making the cable entities have to pay CBS and pay NBC. They're already paying the cables, If you have a subscription, if you still have cable today, you're paying $5 of your bill still goes to ESPN.
Wow.
But I was talking more about the newspapers too. That like that digital transition of the early 2000s to 2010s. Even today, there are newspapers that are free and available right on the website, and so getting the consumer accustomed to paying for quality journalism is something that again, a handful of entities have figured out. Then you have sort of the specialty publications, whether it's the Information or Punchbowl, depending on your sector, you might subscribe to one. But we are in the great diaspora right now. People are on Substack, people are on podcasts. We try to do a little bit of everything. People are on social media, but the monetization structure around it is still being figured out on an individual level. I mean, I have a few people working at Mo News now, but on a network level where you have very significant expenses, figuring out the business of this is, I don't think no one's quite figured it out yet. They are experimenting, but at the same time, they deal with the issue, Robin, you brought up, which is like they're still making money off the mothership. So while you're still making money while the Titanic is sinking, you're like focused on the money and not spending enough time thinking about, do we have enough lifeboats for everyone aboard the ship?
Full disclosure, please do stay with us. This show podcast to NPR, Spotify, YouTube, all of the fine podcatchers. You can watch it. You can listen to it. We slice and dice it. Instagram, YouTube Shorts. I'm sure there's a MySpace page somewhere. You can find me on Instagram at Robin Farzad, on LinkedIn. Hi, Mom. Hi, Mother-in-law. Shout out to our radio listeners on WVTF, Radio IQ, NPR's news source across the great Commonwealth of Virginia. We are on KPPQ in Ventura, California. We are on WPVM in the gorgeous mountains of Asheville. Holler if you too would like us on your air. My DMs are always open. If you're just joining us, we have friend of the show, Mosheh Oinounou. He is founder of Mo News, which is the social media and digital media news colossus. Gosh, you started it in the throes of the pandemic. You were formerly an executive producer at CBS Evening News. You were one of the people who found that religion as you realized we were all at home and there's only so much we could do. And people were following your hobbyist posts about pandemic and foreign affairs and Washington and stuff. And now it's absolutely exploded. You're a podcast. You're like you know what you are? You're like a fine, high quality, small batch goat cheese that you can't quite find at Whole Foods. Maybe you would find it at, a small Ayurvedic market, and it's hugely popular.
I'm going to use that. Goat cheese. They just had the international cheese competition in Europe over the weekend, and the U.S. Made great strides. We now have the number 5 cheese in the world, Robin. It's a big deal.
Well, here's the thing. You're a small batch, but your numbers, you cited the CNN numbers before. If somebody's patching in, if you were to do an emergency broadcast, let's say something were to happen, God forbid, a space shuttle or rocket or invasion in Taiwan, what would those numbers be versus, say, an MSNBC or CNN at noon on a weekday?
Listen, I think, we see on a weekly basis, some of our videos will get millions and millions of views. Robin, fun story. I hear from anchors at various cable channels who will send me their segments and interviews being like, hey, is this of interest to you guys? I'm like, your network has a large platform on social and on, traditional television. Like, yeah, but you're getting in front of the right eyeballs. I would love if you could cut a clip from my interview and post it on your page as well.
Wow. And you've always been bashful about it, but there must have been overtures to acquire you outright. Look, if it happened to Barry Weiss, it's what is it called? An acquisition where you're like in tech, where they're getting the software crew nominally with the product. It's your brains.
Yeah.
It's your portable alpha. What can you tell us about the people who've approached you?
I don't have much to share, except I find the fact that that acquisition happened this year, the Paramount acquisition of Barry Weiss, very exciting in my world. And there's a number of other people in my world who are intrigued about the possibilities in the coming years as legacy media wants to borrow the sheen and the trust that new media has right now.
And I ask people this. I mean, unfortunately, in my world, I post the most viral thing I have on my Instagram. You can look it up, and it kills me. It's this video of this horse being let loose on a beach, and I wanted to add some yacht rock, Christopher Cross, Ride Like the Wind to it, and everybody thinks it was my horse. I've been getting DMs that are like, will you try our horse shampoo? Will you work with us on ending horse-drawn carriages in Central Park? I was like, I'm all with you about that, but it's not about the horses. Can you follow my pod or my video? Are there people making commercial overtures to you in the DMs? There have to be.
Right now, what's really exciting, frankly, is more about the Fortune 50 companies that are interested in partnering with us.
How
That's been
so?
a very exciting development. I mean, just to give you a sense, I mean, you mentioned height of the pandemic. I'm just, a hobbyist on Instagram trying to inform friends and family about what's happening. And then 5 years later, we now have partnerships with Procter and Gamble, Target, Amazon, and Walmart.
How does that work? Does that work as a kind of a watermark, as a mention, as a live events thing?
It's a whole variety of things. We've done some branded content. We've done mentions. We have done like a deep dive with Procter and Gamble into like how they, for example, they're the largest perfumery in America. So we went inside their scent lab. And so I'm doing stories that I think are actually super interesting that also happen to give their brand exposure. So we're finding creative partnerships. One of the things, Robin, about this world is in the old media world, there was very much this Chinese wall up between editorial and business. And this new world is both somebody who is managing the editorial at Mo News, but also running the business. I have my hands in both. And so, I'm having these conversations with the brands and I'm saying, a transactional promotional ad is not going to work in this world. Let's talk about some content that is both educational and interesting and will bring your brand awareness. So it really runs the gamut right now. We try to be bespoke in our approach.
So is that considered an advertorial, like with what the CEO Meredith Kopit-Levien did at the New York Times with T-Brand Studio? Like I remember Netflix had a new season of Orange is the New Black, and they wanted to commission something about mothers in jail or the peculiarities of child rearing when you're incarcerated. I mean, a featurette, a 15, 16-minute thing that really required journalistic chops, but was commissioned by a corporation.
Yeah. I mean, it's all versions of that. One thing we try to always keep in mind is to be very transparent about it. That's not true when it comes to other folks in new media and social. So we'll go out of our way to, I'll repeat it in the beginning and at the end and during that this is an ad, but I think you'll get a lot out of this. And so we get feedback from people being like, I was ready to skip through that ad, but I actually have found it super interesting and super educational. And I appreciate the information I learned from it.
Are you going to get baby swag soon?
Are
these guys going to send you like baskets of Johnson & Johnson Tearless? And
we've gotten diapers. We got a stroller.
That's amazing, because you do see a lot of those mommy influencers out there who are always sharing these soft.
Yeah, but in my case, I'm like, I'll do a news brief while I take my daughter for a walk, and they're like, yeah, but like you also report on things that are like very negative, and we don't want to be associated with those things. So I was like, yeah, I can't control the news. I can just tell you that I will do the news every day.
Let's move to the news. It's really an admirable juggle. Clearly, I'm a fan. I've only failed on you 1,000 times, and maybe I've just crossed the Chinese wallet doing that. But what about the news? You have a lot of fear and loathing in D.C. about a 2026 blue wave that obviously happened to Trump in his first go-around in 2018. There were some bad signs. There's clearly Marjorie Taylor Greene decamping and breaking away from the MAGA coalition. That there's this push to redistrict in Texas, and if that's going to be retaliated in California. Are we nearing a lame duck stretch of the Trump presidency? Or are there pockets? Are there other levers of power that you think he's going to pull?
That's the big question. Like Trump has approached this presidency different than all other presidents, including Trump 1, by the way. Trump 47 is very different from Trump 45 in terms of his willingness this go around to test the bounds of his power, right? But at the end of the day, despite the Trump 2028 hats, there is a constitution, and ultimately we will be going into an election in both parties, right? An interesting primary on both sides. One of the key questions we'll be looking at here, Robin, there's been some good reporting from Punchbowl, from Puck, about upwards of 20 House Republicans that are looking to lead.
Yeah, I see that.
And it's so interesting, right? Because Republicans now control all levers of power: the Senate, the House, the White House. But ultimately, Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, has been very deferential to the president, and it has made Republican members of Congress ask, "What are we even doing here?" Congress, through the last decade, 2 decades now, continues to pass fewer and fewer pieces of legislation. But like the numbers are even stark by comparison to recent years. Last year, 2024, had like 200 something pieces of legislation. This year, I think they're just under 50 right now, Robin. And last year they broke a record for the fewest amount. And so ultimately, I think there's some people on Capitol Hill who are like, what are we doing here? If we're going to just be deferential to the president, you certainly see the president's numbers starting to drop. They have been dropping. You see the key issue, which is always the key issue, right? James Carville coined, it's the economy stupid. It's the economy stupid 30 years later. And there's a feeling that, and it's not just a feeling, right? The numbers back it up. This is going to be the most significant year for job cuts since 2020. And if you take the pandemic out, you got to go back to 2009. There was a good Wall Street Journal story.
Which was really bleak. People forget.
That was the Great Recession. That was peak Great Recession.
Global financial crisis was happening. And we're in this strange period right now where the numbers might say 4 to 6% unemployment and 4 to 5% unemployment. But clearly, as you know, in our field, it's just been bombed out. It's cored out. The vexing situation of 20-somethings, of people with college degrees, of people on the verge of getting college degrees that are not employable anywhere. It's like, get in line. The resume is being vetted by some AI algorithm. It's this particular LinkedIn dystopian hell out there, and that's not reflected
You've made your resume on AI, and it's being analyzed by another AI.
And it's not reflected in the BLS numbers, right? Or the stock market, which is near a record, which is overwhelmingly reflecting the Magnificent Seven and the big gains in AI, right? It's this unbelievable 15-year run since those depths of 2009.
Right. You had the interest rates super low for a very long time. Ultimately, Wall Street increasingly not reflective of Main Street. One thing, I'm looking at a few trends now, right? We're talking about politics. So we're going to see what happens next year. Historically speaking, whether it was Clinton losing his house in 94, Bush, well, didn't happen in 02.
Obama 2010 was bloody.
But, right. Bush loses it finally in 06. Obama loses in 2010. Trump loses it in 2018. Biden loses at least the House, right, in 2022. So historically,
nominally, it wasn't that bad. In fact, it emboldened him. Yeah.
Well, because he didn't lose the Senate, right? It wasn't as bad, but you still had Speaker McCarthy. And so now the question is with Trump, which is why Trump is taking this gerrymandering tack, right? That he's trying to redraw the maps. And it's not just, you mentioned Texas, right? You got North Carolina, you got Missouri. Indiana looks like it's going to make its move, though it's going to be more challenging for him there. Ron DeSantis might make a major move in Florida. That could eliminate 5 blue seats in Florida. Then you have Gavin Newsom responding in California. And the big question for Dems is, can they make any magic happen for themselves in Maryland, in Illinois, in New York? It's more challenging in some of these blue states. There is a blue seat opening up in Utah. That's due to a legal issue there related to the law. But ultimately, Democrats probably, that's a +1 for them over there. So you have the larger headwinds. You have the fact that as you look at politics, folks, there are midterm elections next year. A third of the Senate is up. There's probably 6 Senate seats that we're looking at.
Do you think the Senate's really in play?
Not in play, but you could start to bring the margin down a little bit, right? Right now it's a 53-47 Republican Senate. It could go to 51-49. But
he'll still be able to reinforce the Supreme Court, right? If Clarence Thomas wants to step down.
Or Alito, right?
Or Alito, right?
And so there is that. No, the Senate's not in play. The House is in play. But even the House, right, 435 seats. Of those seats, in a normal year without all this gerrymandering, we're probably looking at 24 seats that are competitive, which is just incredible to think about, that, 95% of the seats are basically locked in red or blue. And I'm old enough to remember in my youth covering the 06 midterms when we were following 80 seats that were competitive. That's just how much gerrymandering has been done just in the past 2 decades. So big question mark there in terms of what's going to happen. But it always comes down to the economy. As we speak here, the president is traveling to Pennsylvania. He needs to talk about affordability. And in one breath says, I'm the affordability president. In the other breath says, affordability is a con job pushed by Democrats. Okay, which is it, right? Ultimately, we saw with Zoran Mamdani in New York. We saw it in these sort of off-year elections in the great state of Virginia. Commonwealth of Virginia, and New Jersey, that the economy matters to people. And when you break down the electorate, Axios had a good piece on this last week, a third are going to vote blue, a third are going to vote red, and about a third move back and forth. And that's why we've always seen the needle move back and forth. You could look at the presidential level, right? Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump. We go red, blue, red, blue, red, blue. And it happens with the Congress too. And so you saw a lot of people last year. Trump made the argument, Biden, inflation, bad, I will be good. Sure, let's give him a shot. And now we're a year in, and the impression is things are not better. Things, in many cases, might feel worse. And is the president spending enough time on this, right? And the perceptions matter. The president wants to talk about gas prices. Sure, they're down. You can point to certain things in the economy that are down. But ultimately, the argument Democrats are going to try to make here is the president is much more concerned with his golden ballroom than he is about your pocketbook issues. So put us back in there.
Moshe, who is the leader right now of the Democratic Party? Is it California Governor Gavin Newsom? Is it, somebody else in the wings? Clearly, Mamdani had a big win for the far left wing of the party in New York. There's Bernie agitating. There are others. Clearly, someone like Nancy Pelosi has sunsetted. Hakeem Jeffries, I don't know how much clout he has. We always ask this existential question ahead of midterms, and clearly Abigail Spanberger, who just won resoundingly in Virginia, we had her on the show earlier in the year, is a leading light. There's Mark Kelly in Arizona. What seems to be coagulating?
It's interesting. There's still not one person, right? Like even when you look at the 2028 polls, who do Democrats want to be their next leader? And they're all sort of hanging out under 20%. Gavin at 18, Kamala at 16, Buttigieg at 12. There's no one that is really broken out. What I find super interesting, I imagine you were watching this a Friday afternoon several weeks ago, was the Mamdani Oval Office meeting with Trump. It's
unbelievable. It's irresistible to watch it. I blush when I see them smiling at each other.
It was like, wow, what a first date. Have you ever been on a first date like that? That was incredible.
It was like, what it did remind me of? My mind works randomly. You could go on YouTube and see Andy Warhol pulling up at WrestleMania, and Mean Gene Okerlund interviewed him at the end. It's like, when would these paths ever cross? But it was fun to watch.
It was fun to watch, and what was so interesting about it is, going into the Mamdani.
Yeah, call me a fascist. It's okay.
You can. Whatever, right? When have you ever known Trump to be like, insult me to my face in my office?
It's almost like he was proud. It's like, player game recognizes player and vice versa.
Exactly, right? Like, I respect what you've done. I stuck a finger in the eye of my party and won despite everyone questioning me. And you went from 1% to mayor of New York as a 34-year-old Ugandan-born Muslim, right? Everything that Republicans tried to make Obama, right? He's a secret Muslim from Africa.
He was overt.
Mamdani is an actual Muslim from Africa. Right? And then it becomes the mayor of New York City 25 years after 9/11. Like, who would have thought
Who would have thought?
Right? And so I think the point of all of this is a lot of Republicans were prepared. And, my thought going into this was like, oh, great. He's got a socialist mayor of New York City. That's going to be the argument in next year's midterms. Like, look, if you elect Democrats, they're going to just put all these socialists in, yada, yada, yada. And he sort of just popped that balloon. If I'm Elise Stefanik, I'm a little upset. I'm very upset right now. Who's running for governor of New York next year, because her entire thing is he's a jihadist, Muslim socialist mayor of New York, and we can't have this, right? And Trump's like, he can call me a fascist in my office. I would live in his city. I want him to be successful. Now, we'll see how this all unfolds. We know how all these relationships unfold, right? The big question going to 2025 was, how long will the Elon-Trump relationship last? And not only did we have we had a marriage, we had a breakup, now we have a rekindling of the two, at least if I didn't hear the audio from the dinner at the White House several weeks ago, but it appears they seem to be in good standing again. And so, when you get to the core question here, who is the leader of the Democrats? What you do see is certain people on the upswing, right? AOC, super interesting. The fact that we can have a serious conversation right now about her running for president. And we know that she will be gangbusters when it comes to fundraising. She's incredible in front of a rally. And you have a Democratic base that has gone through losing with Hillary Clinton. 2020 is sort of an asterisk year, right, with COVID, but losing again in 2024 with Biden and Kamala, being told centrism is where you need to go. It reminds me of the Republican Party coming off the losses of McCain in 2008, Romney in 2012, doing a analysis, finding out that they need to be reaching out to the middle.
And they tore that up.
Donald Trump lit that on fire at the bottom of an escalator on Fifth Avenue, right? Yeah. He said, not only am I not going to reach out to Latinos and be centrist, I'm going to say in my opening speech in June of 2015 that we have rapists and murderers crossing this border. And he has remade the party. So you have a lot of Democrats saying they didn't follow the rules, and they just he was able to convert young working class Latino men and black men to his party, right? Maybe it's time for us to completely blow up the Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, the party that exists today. And that's where I think, if you are a traditionalists, right? Like Bashir out of Kentucky or Josh Shapiro, centrist. That's sort of like where you would think the Democratic Party says, this is what we need to do, right? We need to reach out to purple state, Democrats who've converted Republicans before. That's where we need to be. Whereas there's probably a group of Democrats right now who are looking at the numbers being like, no, we need to go insurgent. That ultimately the new way to think about American politics is populist, with populism on the upswing. And there's a lot of similarities between Trump and Mamdani and AOC and Bernie Sanders in terms of how they are advocating burn it all down. This place is not working for you. And you see it playing out. I mean, Robin, last week, Luigi Mangione was back in court and the fangirls were outside. And I see it from my audience on Instagram. And it's one of the reasons I love being on social media is I get a gauge for people who are saying, listen, I don't defend murdering a insurance executive, but let me now go on a rant about how much I hate health insurance. And here's my experience. And this is what they did to my mom. And this is what they did to my brother. And so I understand it. And
so where's the indignation about the Affordable Care Act subsidies? Where's the indignation about SNAP benefits? This is what I don't quite understand. Grievance is really satisfying. And if you don't like an institution, the prospect of releasing several greased boars into the institution, the president's office at the university with the frat brothers, that's appealing, but it's kind of short-lived. In the end, I mean, what's your record? What's your status? People like the grievance, but this stuff isn't forcing an indignation. SNAP just had a near-death experience.
Yep.
You saw the indignation with government workers in Northern Virginia and in D.C. You see the healthcare benefits is still not being resolved. People are going to get that sticker shock coming out of it. They talk about kitchen table issues and why, eggs cost this much outside of the bird virus, why beef costs this much. Why still has overwhelming popularity in the Republican Party.
Yeah, for now, right? Ultimately, let's see how the sticker shock goes. I mean, there's a lot of Republicans who are saying time is running out here. And, this is where we're at in December of 2025. Where are we going to be at in March? Where are we going to be at in June? Robin, I'm hearing from a lot of small business owners who talked about just trying to keep their head above water this year with the tariffs, who are very worried about next year, that they just made it through this year. So I think there is potentially the bottom is yet to drop here if things don't change. And you are seeing a move here, right? The White House suddenly lifted the tariffs that we put on Brazil because we were mad about the prosecution of Bolsonaro, because it turns out we get a lot of food from Brazil. What will they need to do? Will we suddenly see in February, like, okay, the tariffs have accomplished everything they need to accomplish, and we're going to lift a bunch of them now, because ultimately we know the impact that they're having on a bunch of businesses, big and small, in this country. But to, your larger point, I think a lot we'll learn a lot through this midterm election, and we'll see the impact of all of this play out in November. One thing we haven't even gotten to is, like, polling is broken. Do we have an actual gauge? I mean, we cite the numbers and Pew and Gallup and all these institutions, but ultimately, are they picking up everything that's happening out there accurately? Is one of the big questions I have. And so maybe when we talk about, it won't be 25 seats. Maybe there'll be seats that are plus 20 red that will suddenly go blue. I mean, we watched that small election happen in Nashville last week, where Republicans still won, but not at the numbers they were supposed to win. It was a plus 22 seat for Trump that I think they won by 8 or 9 points. So that's quite a swing in a pretty red district. So I think there is a lot will be learned here. And ultimately, going back to your core question here, which I think began this part of the conversation, who's the Democratic leader? I don't know. And I think it hurts them. Certainly we saw that bit play out during the government shutdown and the way that it ended, that, ultimately you had a handful of Democratic senators who decided to, cross the line because they didn't want to hold the line anymore. And so can Democrats get their act together? Can they have a coherent message is the big question.
In closing, Moshe, I do want to take you to the Middle East. You probably saw the headline in the Wall Street Journal this morning about the unimaginable amount of rubble that Gaza is now. That just digging out ordnance, human remains, everything else. I wonder, thinking back to that press conference in the White House, if Trump was trolling the world by saying we're going to turn Gaza into a waterfront, Riviera. But maybe he was trying to put it out there that you guys, you don't really have options with me. The Arab Middle East or someone is going to have to rebuild it. I don't know what this presents in terms of a chance for the Saudi, Qatari, US coalition to come together and rebuild something, maybe some modicum of hope out of the rubble that is Gaza, and hope for the Palestinian two-state solution or whatever state solution. You've covered this so well. You've had cabinet members on, you've had military people on, you've had members of the government of Israel on. What do you see then in terms of the slate of what's going to be necessary? I mean, this is multiples the project that Ground Zero was in Lower Manhattan.
I mean, it's akin to the rebuilding of Germany post-World War II, just in terms of the ordnance, the destruction, tens of billions of dollars to just get to scratch again. You also have the issue of the tunnels. You know, there were estimates that we're talking about, you know, in an area of Gaza the size of Philadelphia, right? You know, talking about 8 miles by 25 miles. They thought there were 150 miles of tunnels at various levels. They think today there might be 400 miles of tunnels at various levels under Gaza. Building any infrastructure with all those tunnels below is a huge challenge. And the Israelis have various estimates. They're still trying to figure out how much they destroyed, how much they didn't destroy. But that is a core component here. So it's not just, you know, you have to go deep into the ground there for the rebuilding. Add to that the fact that as of today, we are allegedly transitioning from phase 1 to phase 2. There is one body left of a Israeli hostage that they're still trying to find. But as we get there, Gaza itself is split into two, right? The Israelis effectively control just over 50% of Gaza. Then you have Hamas still controlling the other 50% of Gaza. So, you know, there is serious conversations now about rebuilding only taking place in the Israeli-controlled areas because of the inability to control the situation in the Palestinian-controlled You also had this weekend, you know, the Doha forum was taking place, and I was struck by the fact that Tucker Carlson, we could have a whole separate conversation there. Tucker is interviewing the leader of Qatar, and he's talking about the rebuilding, and he's like, we're not paying for the rebuilding. That's not our job, despite all the money that we have. And so there's going to be an ongoing discussion here. Getting to your point about the Riviera of the Middle East, you know, what Trump was trying to do there, in retrospect, is effectively challenge the Arab world to say, if you don't deal with this, I'm going to deal with it on my terms. And you saw how quickly that suddenly
that was high level trolling.
Yeah, that was a
you saw Susie Wiles, his chief of staff. You saw her eyes bulge out. You saw Netanyahu with this Cheshire grin. Yeah. And then the world saying, what?
Right. And then Trump's putting out an AI video of him and Bibi sunbathing in Gaza. I mean, and then suddenly, you know, within 48 hours, 72 hours, there's a summit in Cairo with the Arab world saying, okay, we commit to, you know, be involved in this. Because, you know, the Arab world for a very long time, you know, it likes to play the Palestinian issue for their own domestic politics, but then not actually do much about it, right? You actually saw, funny enough, the Iranian leader at the Doha Forum over the weekend being like, we've done more for the Palestinian cause. No, we can argue that separately in terms of whether that's what they've done is bad for the cause. They have done more for the cause. The question is whether it was good or bad. I think it's pretty easily to say. But ultimately, then the Arab world, which likes to use it, but then doesn't want to bring in the refugees, right? Like Poland has taken in more than 1.5 million Ukrainians during this war. Germany has, you know, all those countries have. Over in the Arab world, there's been like, well, no, if you let them out, then the Israeli, you know, their argument is, you know, that makes a Palestinian state less possible, yada, yada, yada. And we can, you know, argue that, you know, for a while. But ultimately, it is on the neighbors, right? It is on those neighboring countries to help with that process. Certainly, the Israelis don't want to, you know, spend a huge amount. But then, of course, well, what happens if these people continue to live in tents for years or decades to come? Well, that only, you know, incentivizes further extremism, right? You know, if you live in these dire circumstances and your home and your business and your family has been killed in this war, well, then you want revenge. And so, you know, it incentivizes the Israelis to, you know, have to spend money here. But that's not good domestic politics in Israel either.
Which drives me, I mean, I have to ask, when is the reckoning for Netanyahu? Everybody dreaded his day after, the morning after. I mean, you hear apocryphally what Golda Meir had to face out of 1973, that this is ultimately on his watch. And when you're outside of an emergency wartime government and coalition government, he's going to have to answer for it.
He is, but the thing about Israeli politics is he doesn't need 51% of the vote. He just, you know, needs to put together a coalition. And ultimately, we'll see how that election plays out. It has to happen at some point in 2026. But I will say that, with all the downside to Bibi, he can also cite in the past 2 years, given how long the war has gone, that in this time, Hezbollah has been, significantly weakened. Iran has been significantly weakened. Hamas has been significantly weakened. And the Israelis, in this sort of world they live in, have never been more powerful militarily in the region. They can fly from Tel Aviv to Tehran, no questions asked. That's
not commercial though. They used to be able to in the time of the Shah.
Yeah,
you're talking the fighter jets.
No, they got to fly. They got to take an F-16. But ultimately, no one's shooting them down between Tel Aviv and Tehran. They control parts of Syria now, right? They control the Syrian Golan and Hermon. And so the Israeli military, at a time where the country has never been weaker reputationally globally, has never been more militarily powerful in the region. And I think a really interesting fact that has not been discussed enough is that even with this 2-year war, even with all the criticism of Israel and its conduct of the war, the Abraham Accords stuck, right? The UAE kept the relationship. Jordan kept its agreement. Egypt kept its agreement. Bahrain did. Yada, yada, yada. Morocco did. That is super fascinating. And it shows you, if you're Israel, that, ultimately these leaders realize that there is more opportunity in the future to keep these relationships going. And I think there's a lot of talk now with MBS and the leader of Saudi about a potential deal there. And so getting to the Israeli domestic politics, Bibi continues to be, the Trump of Israel, right? This person who is, whether so divisive, right? You either love him or you revile him, but he's super powerful. He has 9 lives. And at his weakest point, he's able to constantly pull out a rabbit out of a hat. And so at this juncture, as we speak today, I think most Israeli analysts would tell you he's going to pull it out again.
And I will reiterate one more time for the sake of full disclosure. I was born in Iran, and I'll say if the Trump administration were to extend a sanctions waiver to me and you were giving me protection of the Ayatollah to visit, let me open a Chipotle in Tehran, I will bring our civilizations back together. I'll become wealthy, I'll donate all of it, and I'll win a Nobel Prize, but that's neither here nor there. That's for another
episode. You think they're into burritos over there?
I think whenever I bring Iranians, whenever I bring them to the United States, it just blows their minds. Oh, Faisal, why do we bring it to Iran? I was like, I really can't. But there was a glimmer, back during the Obama administration, McDonald's and others did have sections of their websites that talked about the opening. And if you're interested in a franchise in Tehran, it tells you how quickly things move over 10 years.
Well, and that's the thing is like, we just mark this week as we speak, the 1-year anniversary of Assad's downfall, right? And that happened, that was
in
slow.
No time at all.
Until it was fast.
It's like
the Zorba the Greek
dance.
It's
like the quote about bankruptcy, it takes years to happen, then it happens overnight, right? Something like that.
From the exactly. In Greece, you got the Zorba the Greek dance. Like it starts slow and then it goes super fast. Actually, it's funny. I was covering the NBC. I was working for NBC at the Olympics, the 04 Summer Games in Athens. And we got there a couple months prior to that. And like half the things weren't done. And they're like, we're Greek. We move slow and then we move fast. But don't worry, it'll be done. Now, needless to say, they had to like build huge fences to like block our view of like huge sand piles that existed when the games happened. But one of the key questions, actually, Robin, and it brings me, I'm going to throw a question at you, is coming out of what we saw in Iran this year. What happens? Is there any chance that the regime, it falls or is weaker? Like, what do we think happens with Iran? Or are they just sort of like licking their wounds at this juncture?
Does it not blow your mind that happened? That Trump gave a head fake that told Israel and Iran, I'm not going to cover for you everything. The next thing we know is these bunker busters were dropped. It all happened very rapidly. It happened with ease. We had Barak Ravid, the Axios reporter, on the show. And yet there's been no follow through. There has been a sense of violation by the Iranians. Maybe Netanyahu romanced the idea that the Iranian street would rise and the victors would be there and they'd bring the Shah or someone back. Yes, that happened this year in June.
that was the
I mean, in addition to like a trade war, a very eventful year, that kind of stuff happened. You have a former Al-Qaeda member, ISIS member, now running Syria, visiting the White House. Stuff is stranger than fiction, and I didn't imagine it would happen, and I didn't imagine that, you could put Humpty Dumpty back together the way it is right now. But again, as you spelled out, with what happened in Syria, what happened with Hezbollah with the pager attack, what happened in Iran with the bunker busters, something has to give. Something in this realignment, in this balance of power, as you evidenced with the Abraham Accords in the Arab countries, saying that I'm still sticking with Israel in this. It's really stranger than fiction to me. And Netanyahu avoiding some sort of conviction, hoping for a pardon, right? You cannot make all this stuff up.
No, and we now have a mayor of New York who says he's going to arrest Netanyahu, if he comes here on war crimes charges. And Netanyahu's like, I will test that. That'll be one of the events we'll watch in 2026. So, this year is going to be super intriguing when it comes to domestic politics, and also when it comes to what's unfolding in Europe right now. Robin, is super interesting to watch the trend lines there. I was talking to some folks in the German government who are closely watching in the coming years. We keep seeing the more far right parties do well because of the challenges that those countries are facing in regards to the migration that is has happened over the past decade. But the political trend lines in Europe and the coming elections are going to be super intriguing to watch here. And then, of course, the big question, I'm still intrigued about the Xi Jinping phone call to Donald Trump recently, where suddenly Xi brings up, let's talk about Taiwan for a second. What's happening there? When I talk to, folks in the intelligence community, the big concern about a Chinese invasion of Taiwan has been starting next year. That they think, based on the weapons development happening right now, that there's a window the Chinese know they have between 2026 and 2029 when it comes to weapons development, that there's an opportunity. Now, how do they approach taking Taiwan? Is it a traditional invasion? Is it some sort of siege that they lay around the island? What happens there? What do they think Trump might do in reaction to that is going to be super interesting to watch, especially in light of the state of the Chinese economy. And I don't think that China gets enough coverage in the U.S. given its just impact globally, economically. But we end up talking about developments in the West Bank in Israel, right, an area the size of Delaware, much more than China with 1.5 billion people and impact on the global economy. And I'm always try to be introspective about that as a member of the American media.
And you've just officially encouraged me to get into my weighted blanket, shut off my phone, order a pizza, and sleep until April. Thank you for that. This world of ours, sir. Mosheh Oinounou, he is the founder of Mo News. He's been in legacy media. He's now an insurgent in digital media. It is always a joy having you on. Clearly, I could have gone on for hours. Please, sir, you're a friend of the show. Come back on whenever you'd like.
We only got through 15 countries. We got 170 to go. Next week, Azerbaijan.
Albania.
The Albanian army just took over Warner Brothers.
Thank you, Mosh.
Thank you, Robin.
Full disclosure, special thanks again to Ian Stewart. If you are listening to us on the radio, note that while we cut for broadcast, the entirety of every interview is on podcast, whether on the NPR app, Spotify, Apple, YouTube. Find them all at one neat link, fulldradio.com. Again, fulldradio.com. And recommend us to a friend. And catch me on both CNN and NPR's Here and Now. I'm Robin Farzad. Thank you for listening. Back with you next week.